Hello everyone! So I'm actually filming this the same day as my Edwardian skirt mock-up vlog, and that project gave me enough confidence, probably too much confidence, which has motivated me to get started on another mock-up as well. So let's dig through and see if I can find it. I can't do the Edwardian blouse mock-up yet because it is sealed, and I want to get some good video clips of it sealed before I pull the pattern pieces out of this and ruin the factory folds. So I'm going to get started on the one for 1910 instead. Here it is. Of course, it would be the absolute last one that I pick up. So this pattern is still in its mail order sleeve, which is kind of cool. So this is what it would come shipped to you in. And this is a pictorial review pattern. And I'm not actually sure what that means. But it is made for a bust that's 34 inches. So I'm probably gonna have to size it up a little bit unless it runs large like the last one. I can't find the brand of this pattern. Actually, Pictorial Review probably is the brand. And this is a ladies one-piece costume without lining, and it talks a little bit about how much fabric you need and the measurements it covers and all of that good stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these pieces out. This one looks like it has more thorough instructions than the previous one. Yeah, wow, okay, so we have all of this is instructions and all of this is instructions. So we're definitely working with a heck of a lot more than the last pattern, but unfortunately we do not have any pictures that show the construction process, and I'm a much more visual person, so that'll make it a little bit more challenging, though I do appreciate this visual guide for how to lay out the pieces. So I'm gonna go open this up and make sure that all of the pieces are here. Also, this was not my first choice of pattern. There were two others that I preferred, and I actually ordered both of them, and then one of them they couldn't find and the other one arrived missing half of its pieces. So this was sort of my final chance at getting something in my price range in a size that was anywhere near mine in a style that I kind of liked. Also, it's worth noting this was patented on April 30th, 1907. So this actually has an earlier patent than the Edwardian skirt and blouse that I'm making, but this is a much later looking style. I've had the privilege of looking through some of McCall's patterns books from the early 1900s, as well as some catalogs that you can purchase PDFs of on Amazon, and this is much more in line with the styles you'd see in the early to mid 19s. So I definitely feel like this is a good representation of the second decade of the 20th century, even though the patent does not align with that. So I think this is the only one where I'm fudging that a little bit and I'm portraying something as being from a decade it isn't actually from, but to me this is very, very clearly 19s in style, so I don't feel too bad about doing that. Very good news, all the pieces are intact and they look to be in beautiful condition except for the one that I tore and had to tape back together. Now I'm gonna go ahead and iron these pieces because they're way too wrinkled for me to do a proper mock-up out of them right now. So these instructions are incredibly complicated. There are a lot of words there, okay? And there are a lot of steps and they're not separated by spaces and it's very difficult to follow. So I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to type this out into Microsoft Word or whatever Apple's equivalent of that is, step by step. Because for this project, I do actually want to follow the instructions that are provided. I think that's part of the interest in doing this. So I'm going to type this up and hopefully that will make it easier to follow. As you can see, I think I did it. It only took me 12 minutes. Surprisingly, this is only 500 words, but it feels like so much more when you're trying to read it. I may be slightly biased given the contract I signed last year, but I think when you look at this and its instructions compared to the ones from McCall's one, it's really easy to say why McCall's has stayed in business and Pictorial Review has not. So on that note, I'm just going to proofread this and then print it out, and then I can try and do some assembly before it's time for bed. The printer isn't working, so I'm going to have to keep my computer on hand. I think I have all the instructions typed out, and I'm just going to take this project one step at a time. So it's going to be a lot more vlog-like than the first behind the scenes mock-up making video was, just because I really feel like I have to do this one step at a time, otherwise I'm going to get so lost and confused, and then you guys will be lost and confused, and no one likes feeling that way. So our current instruction is to turn side edge of front under slot perforations and lap side front with notches and edges underneath even. Stitched position about 1/4 inch away from folded edge from the yoke extension to the small O perforation in front section and close the seam underneath. So using our handy dandy pattern, these are the perforations that they mean about turning under. They're kind of difficult to see. So we're actually folding the fabric pretty far underneath the edge. Like, I'm surprised they're folding it in by that much. That seems really unnecessary to me, but I shall do as pictorial review tells me to. It also says sew until the O perforation, which must be this, and then close seam. But, okay, so I guess they mean that you sew this part as a normal seam, then top stitch it down, and then this part is done as a lapped seam. Am I understanding that correctly? Maybe it means I should do this all as a lapped seam, but closing the seam underneath means binding the seam allowance? I'm not like 100% sure on that. I'm also not sure what the seam allowance is here, because this is the seam allowance rule. So let's read this together. On edges of the shoulder, underarm sleeves, and cuffs of this pattern, 1 inch is allowed for letting out seams, if necessary. And these edges are marked by the shaded portion of the construction guide. On all other edges, 3/8 of an inch is allowed for seams and finishing. So does that mean this is a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance? It also doesn't mention anything about buttonholes, which is sort of weird since they are clearly there. And I mean, personally, I would do that first. So, okay, it closes below these OO perforations. So this must be where the buttons start. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and do the seam, and then we will revisit all the craziness that is going on next. I'm going to go ahead and fold this edge inward at their perforations and just do it as a normal lapped seam. But first, I want to mark the pocket onto this before removing the paper. Do you see anywhere that the pocket is marked? There's a pocket there. Why is there no pocket here? It's supposed to have this little T formation. Oh, I see the dots. I found them. God, it's like bird watching. One there, and one there. Okay. Whew. Tough stuff. Alright, so I realize this just looks like a sea of Christmas lights, but I followed the first 2 instructions, I think. So the next step is sew yoke extension to upper edge of side front section and close seam underneath. I think I did that. And then sew yoke extension to upper edge of side front matching notches, which I feel like I've also done. Please note there is no mention of the yoke extension here. I'm just assuming this is the yoke extension. So then we have all of this underarm stuff, turned hem at front notch, line small operations. These are supposed to mark the center front. I'm going to measure how far away those are from the front. And then it says lap right front of costume on left with center fronts even and stitched position below the double small O perforations. Finish the edges above perforation for closing. I did mark the double O perforation just by clipping the material, but I do not know how far away from this it is supposed to be lapped and what the center front is. I'm gonna have to measure that really quickly, and then I guess I will sew the 2 front pieces together. I'm gonna have to study these instructions a little bit more because there are definitely like 3 or 4 steps in between what I thought I just did and this step, which is what I think I need to do next. So I'll have to do some figuring out tomorrow before I can confirm or deny how to actually do that. This is the phase of absolute despair. I give up. It is currently 9:24 at night and all I've done is cut this pattern out and get the front 2 panels sewn together. And I don't even think I did it properly because apparently I missed like 5 steps. Any confidence I had gained from that mock-up this morning, it's gone. Any confidence I have gained from my 5 years of sewing experience, it's gone. The fact that someone wrote this and expected the typical household woman to be able to understand it is a testament to how underestimated women were in the earliest 20th century, because this is pure gibberish. I'm going to figure this out. Like, it being this difficult, it makes me all the more determined. I'm not going to give up on this. I'm just giving up for tonight and probably for tomorrow. So it is a new day, it is a new month, and I am back to working on this thing. I'm completely restarting the mock-up because the first one just did not work. I'm making this one out of a much lighter colored fabric, so I've been able to use a permanent marker to mark all of the plentiful perforations on this pattern onto the fabric in a way in which they're easily visible. So hopefully that will make the construction process a little bit easier. I've also noticed that there are numbers aligning with the notches in this pattern. So I don't know if you can see them. And I'm pretty sure that these indicate which step they are. So this would be step 1, this would be step 2, this would be step 5, etc. It still isn't super clear how to do everything, especially with how confusing the instructions are. I feel like the instructions don't necessarily align with these steps here, but hopefully I can combine them and find a happy medium and do it that way. Though I am going to have to change some stuff because there are no instructions on finishing the edges of the collar or belt. Even though you can see top stitching on the belt in this picture, it basically just says sew belt in place. So I think they're making quite a few assumptions that in addition to following their instructions to the absolute letter, you're all supposed to be doing all of this stuff in between, which I'm not opposed to doing, but it kind of conflicts with the information they presented, which is annoying. So I made a little bit of progress. I got the front panels sewn together. The number instructions on the pattern have definitely helped, but they're still kind of weird. Like for the sleeve, apparently step 7 or step 6 is to line up the top half and step 7 is to line up the bottom half. So that makes it seem like it's almost a 2-step process sewing the seam, but I can't see any way in which that would be the case. So it also makes things like over here where this edge is 1 and this edge is 2 kind of confusing, because in that instance they describe it almost like it is 2 steps. As you can see, the first step up here, and then you're supposed to sew the yoke extension to upper edge of outside front section and close the seam underneath, which to me sounds like I should be sewing it as a 1/2 inch seam allowance after top stitching the vertical seam, but you can see visible top stitching up here. At least I can in person. So I just sewed it all the same way. I turned the top edge inward at the perforations marked on the fabric. So there's a very weird seam allowance that goes from about 2 inches at the top to 3.5 inches at the bottom. And then I just turned this top edge inward by 3/8 of an inch because everything else has 3/8 of an inch seam allowances. So that is what it looks like inside. So now I'm going to close underarm as notched, which I initially didn't really know what that meant, but that actually means sewing the back panel onto the 2 front panels and also sewing up the shoulder seam. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will have something that looks kind of like a dress. This is such a good look. I feel absolutely beautiful, and I think I look it too. You know, this is really the flattering silhouette that I was hoping it would have. And you can see my beautiful penguin socks at the bottom. Just imagine it with some, you know, historically accurate shoes, but everything else stays the same. We'd be in business. Okay, maybe not, but these shoulders do seem to fit me decently well, and it isn't too small, which was another concern I had. I ended up sort of abandoning their 3/8 of an inch seam thing and did 1/2 inch seams as well instead, because I'm using a wool type fabric for this that does shift around a little bit, and I think it's going to be super difficult to get consistent 3/8 of an inch seams. So if I can get away with 1/2 inch seams, then I will definitely do that. So I think the next step is hemming this, and it did have perforation points I was supposed to turn it inward at, and I believe they're about 1/2 an inch away from the bottom edge of the fabric, but I will double check the pattern and then probably just turn it inward by eye, because again, this is a mock-up, it doesn't have to be perfect. And then we will move on to the next step. So unless I'm mistaken, I think this is actually the perforation point, which is probably 4 or 5 inches up from the hem. And I'm not sure if that's where the fabric should be folded or that's where I should fold the edge of the fabric up to. As you can see, it looks like a pretty wide hem according to this, which makes me think this should be taken up by like 4 or 5 inches, or probably 2 inches on me since I'm tall. Let us consult the instructions. Turn hem up in front at notch. Line small of O perforations indicates, okay, that was a mistake on my part, center front. So this line of perforations indicates the center front. I feel like this is the only thing marking where to turn the hem up. So I guess I will just make up what that means, because apparently that's what you did in the early 1900s. You had all of these instructions, but so few of them were actually helpful. Alright, so the hem is turned inward by about 2 inches, though I will probably have to change that later. Now we have to lap right front of costume on left center fronts, even, and stitched position below the double small 0-0 perforations. Finish edges above perforation for closing. So funnily enough, there is no mention of this in the number system, even though I would feel like closing the front seam is a relatively important step. I have gone ahead and marked the perforations onto this material. Since it's a lighter color, I was able to easily do that during the cutting out process. That was the main reason why I decided to start this mock-up over. So instead of actually lapping the seams, I think I'm just going to sew this as a normal 2.5 inch, 3 inch seam allowance. Basically they're supposed to be sewn together from here, following this line all the way down to the hem. So that is what I'm going to go ahead and do. So now it is time to sew on the collar. Well, actually they tell me to fold the front edge inward first, but I think it's going to give a nicer finish if I sew the collar on. Sorry, it really zoomed in. I think it's going to give it a nicer finish if I sew the collar on, then fold this inward, and it will look like it's coming out of the lapel. At least that would be my assumption. So I think that's what I'm going to do, even though that does kind of go against their instructions. Weirdly enough, for the shawl collar, they say that you should close the back seam, but that doesn't appear to be the case for the pointed collar. So I went ahead and cut it out on the folded edge of the material, which I believe is what this little T here indicates. I don't know if you can see it, but on piece D, there's a T at the straight edge. And there are also some of those at the back, and I believe that signifies cutting out on a fold. But it's really difficult with this pattern since it has been used before. There's quite a few tears at the perforation points, which makes it difficult to identify what those perforations actually are of. So when I was cutting this out, I kept having to reference the marks shown on the pattern here, just to make sure that I was marking everything and doing it correctly. So next step is going to be sewing on the collar, and there are no instructions on finishing the bottom edge of the collar, so I guess I'm just not going to do that for my mock-up, but for the real thing I will probably cut this out twice and sew the layers together to get a clear finish across the bottom edge, because okay. They have these perforations here. There's no friggin' way these are gonna line up. Do you see how far off that is? And both of these edges are cut on a bias, so that shouldn't really be affecting this. That is really annoying. I guess I'm just going to ease it together, but I'm probably gonna add a 1/2 inch onto the back of the collar pattern because this just looks terrible. Actually, I think that's what I'm gonna do right now. I don't want having gathering across the neckline to affect the fit of this mock-up, and then that won't be part of the real thing. So I'm just going to cut this open and add a piece of fabric that's like 1 inch wide or something. Look at that beautiful stitch work. I'm telling you guys, my mock-ups, they're my time when I'm lazy. I'd also just like to point out that there are a bunch of notches or perforations in the, oh my god, they're still over 1 inch off. How in the hell? Oh, you know what it is? I figured it out. So if you look at this pattern, there are these dark areas which are supposed to indicate extra seam allowance. And then in the instructions it did say on the edges of the shoulder, underarm sleeves, and cuffs of this pattern, 1 inch is allowed for letting out the seams if necessary. So that's probably what's happening here. It was intended to be 1 inch smaller than this, but since I have a pretty long torso, I think I'm gonna take advantage of the additional seam allowance they provided there. But that is why the collar isn't fitting, because the collar is 2 inches too short for that to fit. So I guess I'm just going to do this and stretch it, because at least it's closer now, but I'm definitely going to add quite a bit of room onto that when I cut out the final thing. It is also worth noting that there are 4 or 5 notches across this top edge, and there are no notches on the shoulders. There's just this one notch near the front that I've been showing you. So that doesn't make any sense. So am I crazy, or does this not look that bad? The length is actually not terrible on me, so I think I might just keep it how it is and do a 2 inch hem across the bottom. It hits right at my ankle, and even if I put shoes on, that's not going to change, because it's not about how far from the ground the hem is, it's about where it hits on the leg, and this hits at my ankle, or about 1.5 inches above, which I think is good. I actually love the collar. Doesn't seem like it was meant to go with the length of the neckline, but I do really like the shape of the collar. I'm probably going to add a 1/2 inch onto the edges, just because when I do sew the 2 collar pieces together to finish this bottom edge, I think it's going to be a little bit smaller than it looks in the picture, and I like the size of it and the scale of it, so I want to keep that and just add a little bit of seam allowance so that won't change when I do the final thing. I do like how the seaming looks. Obviously this would be closed with buttons. Even though there aren't any instructions for closing the dress, I'm assuming they do in fact want you to put closures in here. This is what I'm currently working with, and let's see what the next step is. Oh joy, we get to work on sleeves. So I'm cutting the long sleeves with the straight cuff, which I'm pretty sure you can use together. There's this whole thing about plait sleeve creasing on slot perforations, lap folded edge to small O perforations and stitch. Leave edges free below the large O perforation and finish her closing. This must be the O perforation they're talking about. So I guess we take this straight edge here and fold it over here and then sew a little bit down. Or do they mean these two dots? I'm pretty confused, but I guess that's what I'm going to try. I don't think I even marked on the sleeve pattern because I didn't notice or think those were important, but evidently they are. So I guess I'm going to try and find those perforations on the sleeve pattern, which is over here. Do they make any more sense when they're actually on the pattern? See, this is what I mean. There's so many tears in this, you don't really know what it's supposed to look like. I don't even see the dots that were marked on the pattern. See here, there's this O, and then there's a little dash above it, and two little dashes below it, as well as two dots parallel to that. So these are the two dashes. This one just tore, so it was misshapen, and they go to touch these, but it's only sewn down until here. Alright, well, if you insist, Mr. Pattern Instructions, I shall do as you say. Also, I'm using flannel for the sleeves because I'm using kind of a medium weight, well, it's actually a pretty heavyweight wool for the dress. So I thought flannel would behave more accurately than the other materials, and I'm more concerned about the sleeve fit than any other part of this project since the dress is intended to be somewhat loose. I also ran out of the other fabric for the sleeves, so there's that too. Wait, I forget. Did it give any indication on which way to pleat it? I think this is what it wanted. But the joy of this pattern is that you never really know. So I don't actually see any instructions on the cuff that I want to add to this. But it does look like you fold it in half and then you sew it onto the hem of the sleeve. So I guess I will do that. So I will sew it like this and then fold it in half and then sew it onto the sleeve. Maybe. Who knows? It's an adventure. I did one of them and I didn't pin it or ease the materials together particularly nicely, but I know if I did do that, I could get it to fit on. As it is now, the cuff is a little bit too big for the perimeter of the sleeve, but I think it will be okay on the final thing. So now I get to pin the sleeves in place, which is very exciting and not at all nerve-wracking. Here you can get a beautiful upper angle. So the step for sewing the sleeves on is basically just match up the notches and sew it on, which hopefully I'm capable of. See, here's our instruction. Sew sleeve and armhole as described for plain sleeve. So they're saying sew as described. And as described as the only description, which is the type of quality instructions I would expect from my blog, not a pattern that people paid for. So despite having all of those issues with the collar, which I initially thought was because I had the shoulder seam out all the way, the sleeve cap actually fits perfectly into the arm side. So I'm not sure what's going on there, if the collar pattern is just wrong or what the deal is. The sleeves do fit me really nice. I'm actually quite impressed by them. If anything, they're maybe a little bit big, but I'm confident with the stiffer fabric that will change, so I'm not going to alter them in any way. I do feel like this is a little far off the edge of my shoulder, so I might just double check the picture image and see if that's correct. It does not seem to sit as far off their shoulder, so I wonder if I should take that in. Actually, you know why it is? It's because I don't have the other sleeve on. So it's just shifting over to that side. So it's going to be absolutely fine once I get the other sleeve on. Even though I'm not at this step yet because I haven't added the pockets, I just want to get the belt out and see how this looks belted. This is the belt pattern. I cut it out on the fold. It's just a rectangle. And the instructions for the belt are: arrange around waist and close at left side. There's no mention of what closures to do or finishing the edges or anything like that. You just wrap it around the waist. Obviously, I will be finishing the edges of this because I don't believe in having visible raw edges on a garment, and I don't think they do either. I think they just got a little bit tired of writing instructions at this point. But I'm going to iron this and see what it looks like wrapped around my waist. Guys, how did this turn out looking so good? Like, I know it's a little frumpy, but this is the perfect 19 silhouette. I don't even have any foundations on. It's the perfect length. The sleeves fit, and sleeves never fit me. I haven't really had to make any alterations except for the collar. So despite the terrible instructions, this pattern actually works. Okay, well, I guess I have a couple minor alterations to make, really just a few things I want to note on the collar. But other than that, this is great. I will try adding the pockets actually, and obviously I will add buttonholes in the final thing, even though there's no mention of how this dress is supposed to close. So I guess that is kind of just up to you. There's appears to close with buttons, so that is what I shall do as well. Alright, so pocket time, and then we're done. So onto the pockets. I have to sew these together to form a bag, leaving a small opening between the O perforations. So we have an O there, and an O there. Do you guys like how I haven't used thread that like even remotely matches on any of this? Because I did that especially for you. So this is where the pocket marking is. You can see it a little bit better. It's like a constellation of dots. Slash the side front along line of 3 O perforations and bund the slashed edges. What does bund mean? Let's consult first steps in dressmaking. Actually, you know, before I go to all of this effort, I should double check the pattern and make sure that I didn't just misread it and it doesn't actually say bund. I bet you I misspelled it and it says bind. It says bind and I'm an idiot. Okay, so I guess you need bias tape or something to bind the edges. I'm not going to do that for this project because it is mock-up, but I will do that for the real thing. It's funny, I was so excited to work with these patterns, and I was so excited that this one had instructions, and then the instructions have just been the worst instructions I've ever seen a pattern have in my life. And I don't want to say that it sucked all of the joy out of it, but it sucked all of the joy out of it. So am I supposed to gather the pocket lining down to fit that? Because let me show you this from the inside. Oh, you know what? I bet I slashed the wrong thing. So I was just saying that this does not appear to fit in there, but there's another dot up here. So I wonder if I wasn't supposed to cut it from this dot to this dot. I was supposed to cut it from this dot to this dot. This is what happens when you put dozens of frigging perforations in your pattern that are completely meaningless when it comes to assembly. Yeah. They don't even have any mention of that extra dot that was definitely on the pattern. So I did that wrong, but honestly, I know how to put in a pocket when you're binding the edges. It's really not difficult to do. So we're gonna end it with this pile. And this was a really beautiful video. I'm sorry if I seemed absolutely frustrated beyond belief. It's just difficult because I wanted this to go so well, and I was so excited to work on these patterns, and to have this one just be so comically bad in terms of instructions is just, oh, it's really frustrating because I really wanted to follow the instructions perfectly, which, I mean, it doesn't look like it based on the quality of sewing here, but I did want to follow all of the steps perfectly, and this just provides you with way too much information to possibly follow it, and also not enough to make a nicely finished garment if you do follow it. It's so bizarre. I've never done anything like it before or seen anything like it before. So if you're wondering about this pictorial review pattern, my review is quite negative. Don't buy it. Thanks for sticking with me. I shall talk to all of you guys soon. Definitely check out the video of me making the final version of this because I promise I'm going to do a way better job, and hopefully it'll look significantly better than this, though this truly is beautiful. So if you want to see me making the real dress, then I will link that on screen as well as in the description box below.